Hello, everybody. My name is Gaven Simon, and welcome back to the Sustainability Podcast. It is day 3 here at the ARC Forum. This morning, we heard from Billy Bardin. He presented and was a panelist on the keynote presentation this morning. Billy, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. Can you give a little bit of background on how you came to Dow and what makes Billy Bardin Billy Bardin?
Well, first of all, thanks for the opportunity. It's great to be here. And I'm, as was stated, I'm Billy Bardin. I'm the Global Climate Transition Director at Dow. I've been at Dow 24 years already, so getting to be long in my career. I joined Dow back in 2000 after I finished my graduate studies as a catalysis researcher because I wanted to do industrial work. I wanted to do industrial research. I wanted to put steel in the ground and have opportunity to make processes at scale, which Dow has allowed me to do over the course of my career.
Yeah.
And during that time, I've had many roles. I've been in R&D, I've been in manufacturing, I've worked in our digitalization programs, now working in the climate change and energy business for Dow. So it's been a great career, lived all over the world, had a chance to meet and work with great people everywhere. So Dow has been very good to me.
That's amazing. I think it's so interesting when you hear from multiple climate professionals that they have a holistic career. It's not just one specific industry. I think you have to have a greater understanding of multiple different business aspects and how a business operates, especially in this world. And I think with your background, this makes you such a great individual for this big role that you have here at Dow. Can you discuss a little bit on the execution of the decarbonization strategies at Dow? What's currently happening and what is expected to come in the future years of Dow?
Yeah, sure. So we are executing on what we call our Decarbonizing Growth Strategy, which is our capstone way of describing what we're doing in decarbonization, which means that we're essentially looking at all of our assets. We are identifying which ones of those have opportunities for upgrade and uplift based on market demand and volume. We're looking at the market dynamics to understand where we could monetize decarbonized products. We're looking at the regulatory environment and working with our policy and advocacy teams to understand what government regulation might look like, not only here in the U.S., but across the world in our various manufacturing locations. We're putting it all together, and we've constructed this Decarbonize and Grow, which takes us on our path to zero to 2050. We've committed to have Scope 1 and Scope 2 reductions of 5 million metric tons between 2020 and 2030.
Okay.
We've committed to have a 2050 carbon neutral target across Scopes 1, 2, and 3 in product benefits for our emissions reduction. So we have these long-term goals which are guiding us.
And it's not just long-term goals. I'm hearing like short, tangible goals across 2025, 2030, up to 2050, and it's in line with the Paris Accordance to 2050 at that net zero target. So that's really great to hear. Can you touch upon the Alberta and Kenyan project? This morning you were touching upon it. I think it's a really interesting story because as a company like Dow and other companies here at ARC, there's a lot of existing facilities that have been here for decades. And how do you utilize existing infrastructure but implement new sustainable technologies to get that reduction in emissions?
It's a great question because we have a lot of legacy assets in our industry, and we will not be able to replace those outright and still have an affordable way of decarbonization. So as you mentioned, we have a project in Alberta, Canada, which is one of our keystone projects for decarbonization between now and 2030. And in that project, we are building at an existing site. We're adding capacity to that site, which means we're adding more ethylene and more polyethylene capacity. We're taking the opportunity when we're adding that capacity to not only decarbonize the new asset that we're going to build, but we will also at the same time decarbonize the existing assets. So as I mentioned, our motto, our strategy is decarbonize and grow. So here we have the growth product of additional volume in the polyethylene chain, and we're using that investment to grow our earnings as well as at the same time reduce our carbon emissions. So it's that component of knowing when to decarbonize, knowing how and what the market demands for decarbonization, and paralleling that with affordable, economically advantaged investment in a location in Alberta that has infrastructure for decarbonization. It has affirmative government policy and action for decarbonization. So there's a lot of dynamics that make that a successful project, but it's one example of how you can take a brownfield site, add capacity and grow and decarbonize all at the same time.
Yeah. That's an essential key point right there. Circular economy, I think it's so important. I still have a passion for urban planning and just civil engineering. You have all of these buildings being torn down and just like rebuilt for a new apartment building. It's like you have this great building with character, and obviously we're not talking about a home here, but I think it's so important to implement those strategies of let's see what we can do with this existing infrastructure instead of tearing down a complete facility that might have operational processes within that can still be utilized in the future, maybe in a different capacity, but still being utilized. So do you think that this project specifically will be an example for the further projects down the road?
I think it can be a model for how we might decarbonize not only Dow's assets, but also the industry asset base. When we build a facility, we build it with 30, 40, 50, sometimes even 60 or 70 year lifetime.
Yeah.
Those assets run for extended periods of time. They run continuously with regularly scheduled maintenance if things are going well. We cannot afford as an industry or society just to discard an asset that was built 15 years ago and start over. No company could survive that kind of investment or turnover in the asset base. And so we have to find ways to be able to decarbonize or invest in the existing assets, make them better, make them more efficient, make them more reliable, make them safer, and at the same time address not only carbon but also water use, impact on nature. And so that's what we're striving to do with our program for Path to Zero and Decarbonize and Grow. Is we know all of our assets, when they will reach end of life, when they will require investment, and we have made appropriate assumptions and plans of how we're going to address them at the proper time.
Yeah. Great answer. So this morning, during that panel discussion, there was one person who asked the question of what are the market drivers for installing new sustainability technologies or conducting research and development regarding sustainability or decarbonization. Where do you see those market drivers, and why is it an economically viable solution to begin that transition now and be prepared for the upcoming regulatory changes in the future?
Well, you mentioned it. Let me take the second part of your comment first. Regulatory environment is part of that.
Yeah.
In the U.S., we're currently incentivizing investment for decarbonization and emissions reduction. In other parts of the world, it's more a policy action that is requiring emissions reductions, for example, in Europe. So different approaches depending on the geography. So that's part of the market dynamic. We do see increased inquiry from our customer base on lower carbon footprint products. We see inquiry from our investor community and our stakeholders and our communities around our facilities, inquiring about low carbon or lower emissions footprint products. And it's not only emissions, it's also water and biodiversity impacts. And so we believe that the market dynamics will justify the investment. We analyze our projects very carefully to ensure what appropriate returns can be made and can we sell volume that is being produced at an advantaged position. Of course, your product also has to have great properties. It has to be able to offer a solution that somebody else does. So it needs to be a competitively advantaged, differentiated product with a lower carbon footprint. And I think as you go forward, you'll see more and more of the big brands, the downstream users in the value chain will be requiring lower carbon footprint products as sort of table stakes, as the ability to even enter the market. And so there's probably some transition time where some people will have lower carbon products, some will not. You may be able to gain volume or market share based on what you have in your portfolio.
Great. So let's talk about emissions reporting. Earlier this week, I presented a presentation regarding multiple global energy regulations across the globe, including the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive in the EU. I talked about SB 253 in the state of California and the awaited SEC disclosure ruling. Can you touch upon maybe like the current status of emissions reporting and maybe Dow's experience with that and what you guys are seeing in the future, what these regulatory frameworks might implement regarding emissions reporting?
Yeah, we certainly have a lot other experts in the company on emissions reporting that's their full-time job. But I think in principle what you see is a trend from saying you're going to do something to doing something to actually having third-party validation that you have done what you will say. So this sort of plan, do, check kind of action, and with the check now being rising eventually to the level of financial audit
Yeah.
for carbon emissions reduction. And so having architecture in place or systems of records in place that will allow a company to validate their emissions reductions or impacts on water and have that validation assured or audited by third parties is going to be important. You mentioned the forthcoming SEC rule. At Dow, we've been working on things, reporting schema like the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure for many years. We signed on to the TCFD.
Okay.
We report against TCFD, and now you see that TCFD, which was voluntary programs, now becoming the baseline for policy action on what will be required for reporting. And the reason that's important is because as an investor, you want to know what is the exposure risk to climate, both transitional risk as well as physical risk, and those reporting schema help determine that, especially in Scope 1 and Scope 2, which are likely to be the main components of the SEC regulation that will come later this year.
You really hit the nail on that one. I feel like you were reading exactly what I had on my presentation slide earlier this week, so great job. Once again, Billy, thank you so much for joining me today on the Sustainability Podcast. It's the day 3 of the ARC Forum. We have one more day left, and I really appreciated it, and thank you so much.
Great. Thank you much.